I come from a number of labs where this was the tradition. And I mean, there is a long history of researchers like myself going into the field, trying to understand what's going on, both from clinical issues and extreme physiologic issues like high altitude. But like my mentor was very interested in things like lung disease in miners, and so they would often go to the field and do these types of set up a lab, do studies. So, and then I've worked a fair amount with Department of Defense, and they have a big interest in how do you facilitate rapid deployment of troops to unique areas where there's either high altitude or exposure to extreme heat or cold. So this has been a tradition in the past. It's been less so probably over the last 20 years, partly because it's harder to get funding for those types of experiments. But so we actually pulled back and did more traditional type research over the last 15, 20 years in the laboratory. And I've finally come up against issues where it's hard to do these studies in the lab, where you're exposing people to high altitude for long periods of time. We can't really mimic it in the laboratory setting, so partially that pulls us out into these field studies. But obviously from a personal perspective, I have a love for adventure and have been an athlete in the past. And so that part of me still kind of comes out and becomes a part of this. I started off in plant genetics. I grew up in an agricultural community. I worked growing up out in the fields, moving irrigation pipe and detasseling corn and digging sugar beets and throwing boxes of lettuce in the Salinas Valley of California. And so I was interested in plants and how to make them better, and worked for several companies that were in that space. But at the same time, I was a driven athlete. I was a cross-country ski racer and a rower in college. And I became very interested in how the body worked and the physiology of human performance, and were there things that I could learn that would give me an edge over somebody else. And so I went down that path eventually and went to graduate school and continued to pursue that interest area. And I try to keep a good perspective on things. When you're in the field, it's stressful. Things never work like we hope or plan. That's almost a given. So you have to learn to adapt and improvise and make something out of nothing. But part of it is to keep a good attitude and kind of keep the stress levels down. And half the fun of these projects are the people you're with and the experiences you share. And so yeah, keeping things light and having fun is a big part of it. I think I look for an adventuresome spirit, a big drive, inner drive, somebody that is willing to put in time, beyond normal hours. In personalities that we can all kind of get along and work together. But each of them I've given a lot of thought to each member of the group, and each has a certain expertise that came along and we've needed at the time. So they're all playing a specific role, and I think they're so far doing a good job. Excellent job. I mean, Everest is, when people think of mountains, they all think of Everest. It's the highest. It's the one everybody struggles to get to the top. Most books have been written about it. We did a project on Aconcagua, I guess it was 2 years ago, and most people don't even know where it is, let alone how high it is, or the fact that it's at a lower latitude, so the barometric pressure is lower, and the hypoxia challenge is really quite intense. But Everest is there's something unique about Everest, and it's got one of the higher base camps, so the exposure that we'll have in the athletes is significant. There's pretty good infrastructure for porters and yaks and groups that'll kind of help us up the mountain. So it will be a exciting adventure.